I'm personally curious, given that both of you are proclaimed introverts and women, and in my experience, most of these open source projects, like the rest of the tech industry, is heavily overloaded with white guys like me.
Who's also an introvert.
Who's also an introvert. So how did the conversation ever spark to begin with? But seriously, I mean, well, what has your experience been there? And was that again, you passed the welcoming, or because I have to expect that that's even more intimidating when you walk into that BOF and there's 23 people and you're one of the three women that are out of that, which statistically is what I'm expecting you walked into. So how was that? And is that something that also takes more courage to get past, to be able to say, hi, I'm here, I don't know much, but I'm interested, to a bunch of guys that are in that room? I'm curious, what were your experiences, both of you?
Yeah, I kind of got lucky in this space, like because the group of faculty who was already doing a lot of research and teaching with open source actually has several female faculty leading that. And so I think that I mean, now that you mention it, I think that really did impact my experience in like a positive way, and that kind of speaks to the importance of being able to have women in these like leadership positions or faculty roles, of being able to draw in and mentor other people. Um, so I think that part I got kind of lucky, but I will say that I do still find it really nerve-wracking and difficult sometimes, like showing up in a space that I don't see women in leadership positions, or I don't see women's voices being elevated if I'm like lurking in like a community's like chat, channels. And that I have also encountered it even with like teaching with students. Like my first term teaching open source, I had a scathing review from a male student that was really like tearing me down for the fact that I was like willing to admit to my students that I didn't have the answers to everything. I was like, I said, I don't know. If I don't know the answer to something, I would say, I don't know, but like, I'm going to figure out how to connect you with the resource, right? Like that, I think is the skill more than me having all the answers. And the student made a direct comparison to a prior male faculty member who never said, I don't know, but just like made up answers, you know, or said they knew when they weren't sure. I don't know. So that's an example of, I think, like stuff that feels really good. And then also like some really bummer experiences that are still around. I still feel like I try to elevate other women's voices in meetings because I don't always feel heard, even in people that I really enjoy collaborating with. So it's a challenge, but Ildiko, what's your experience been like?
I have some similar and some different experiences in terms of, like, for instance, even within my own family, I'm an only child and I'm a girl. Like, it's not like just, oh, we got a boy, so the boy will run off and can do whatever he wants. It's like, oh, it's a girl. We will constantly have to worry about her till the end of everybody's life because, who knows what happens with the poor thing in this awful world. This is how I grew up. So that built some resiliency in me, like even from childhood. Like, I'm a girl, but that doesn't mean that I'm not capable of figuring my things out or protecting myself, for that matter. So that's what comes from my childhood. And that kind of fed into how my professional career was going, because at university, I think the computer science was together with electrical engineering. That was a department with two parts. I think there was maybe 10% women who got in total, the whole department, when we started. And I don't even know the percentage of women who actually finished. So there were not that many girls hanging out. The girls' bathroom was always empty. I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I go in, there's never a line. And I actually feel that I did get really lucky, though. I was more of a teacher's pet person, and I found other, well, white guys who shared the similar values in terms of let's make sure that we finish this thing in 5 years. And, we had like this study group and we took very similar classes where we had the choice and went to places together. We were hanging out. So they were my friends, but we were also a study group and just supported each other. So I think that experience just kind of made me realize that there are allies in this world, and it doesn't really matter if you're boy, girl, identify with a different gender. It really doesn't matter. It's just we're all human beings and we're helping each other. And that experience probably helped me to feel more comfortable if I'm hanging out with guys. And it just started not really matter in terms of me feeling intimidated or not. And the first workplace that was also not really filled with women, we had an assistant who was a woman. And then at one point, we also hired another woman. So I think eventually we hit the 10-15% there too. But my colleagues were very friendly. I knew quite a few of them from university. So that was also a similar experience. Then Ericsson, yeah, not that many girls there either in the projects where I worked. That part is almost surprising, but somehow there weren't too many women. And then the open source community, yeah, not too many women either. But at that time, I kind of, in the big corporate environment, I just realized that my ambition usually pushed me through challenges. A challenge always motivates me. And if the challenge is walking into a room with, let's say, 10 men at a leadership meeting and showing everybody that I'm the person in the room who actually knows what she's talking about, and I'm teaching everybody else, for example, about what open source is, that's okay. And that's more than okay. And I'm more than happy to do that. Both you do it for yourself because you need to feel, comfortable in those situations to be able to keep doing that. And at the same time, paving the path for other women as well. You only need a few to show the example, and then you will have others to come and do the same thing too. And all that helped me. And actually within the corporate environment, I did experience women cutting each other off and under, which was, now that one hurt. I will not lie about that. That one really did hurt. That within our own organization, 2 women and the other woman thought that this is a competition where you just can do anything to come out on top. And I'm like, we don't have to form a sisterhood and very visibly support each other, but don't screw me over behind my back. So that was a very interesting experience. And I think what's really sad in this environment is that sometimes we women feel that we have to almost destroy the other person just for us to stay afloat. And that's not good. So that experience was kind of eye-opening. On the other hand, in the open source environment, with everything that I learned, I didn't really have any more difficulties or challenges to either speak up or just deal with a male-dominated environment. In my experience in the open source community, people always listen to me more compared to a corporate environment, which is the other reason why I keep telling this to people, that I don't understand why people feel that the public open source environment is scarier than a corporate one, because I had way more bad experiences in the corporate environment behind closed doors than in any of the open source communities. And whatever experience I did have in the open source community, that is something that others saw too. So we as a group can go and address it. It was a great question, because again, it's just thinking it through, how actually the open source environment to me feels way more comfortable and safer than a corporate one. It's an interesting comparison. I don't think I ever fully thought it through my own experience.
Yeah.
I'm glad the question kind of helped you do that. In my experience, again, it's been a long 20 years, I think, for open source. There are some notoriously terse, concise, flaming would be the words that were used on how you take or how you get feedback. And I think even working in Open Daylight in the early days with the Linux Foundation, I had one group and one sub project that I had people, and I had one woman in particular who was just frustrated with the tone of conversation. It was too harsh, and they were less tolerant than guys who were also complaining, but didn't leave. But the one was like, you know what, I life is short. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to deal with this person. And I totally get that and appreciate it. And like I said, I do think that good strides across a lot of projects, codes of conduct have become standard practice, and that wasn't the case back in those days. And projects that I personally consider models, being Linux being one of them, has always been known historically as a pretty harsh environment. If you don't behave according to their standards, and that's when you're lucky enough to get a response, because if you really do things wrong, they just ignore you, which I've had many folks learn that lesson the hard way as well. But those organizations have become better. But I do think it is something that is a work in progress still. And it's something that, like I said, is somewhat hit or miss. But it's interesting that you mentioned that your experience is easier to work with folks outside a company than in. And I know for a lot of developers that I know that aren't comfortable working outside in open source, it is because it's amplified, right? It's like the difference between your classroom and social media, right? In your classroom, somebody might not think that you're great, but it's limited to those 30 people, right, that are in your classroom. But when social media or IRC, in the case, you get flamed and called out for something that wasn't the most competent move that you could have made, and then it gets amplified out, that they're afraid of that, right? That's we guys, we have thin skins. We don't know how to take criticism sometimes, so having it exposed is just that much worse for us.
This is so fascinating. Like, I will have coffee with the two of you any day for the rest of my life. Like, so much interesting, like, things to think about. Like, Phil, it's actually very validating for me to hear, like, your experience observing, like, women choosing where to put their energy, like, in part because of, like, tone of communication, because that resonates so deeply for me. And, like, I think, but I also, like, don't know that many other women in open source because of what we're talking about. So it's actually interesting even to, like, hear that through you. And I think and Ildiko, like, some of the things you said about, like, it definitely resonates with me. Like, I find myself sometimes doing things out of, like, a challenge. Like, if somebody's like, oh, I don't know if you're up to that, or, like, I don't know if you're going to do that. Like, it's kind of a joke with my PhD advisor that the minute he said, like, I don't know if you're going to finish, I was like, well, watch me, like, and I think, like, that motivates me. Yeah, exactly. But I also, think it's so important to work on how do we, like, make it so that that doesn't have to be how you thrive in this sort of ecosystem. And I mean, I think we're all engaged in trying to do that. And I think, also to something you said, Phil, I think, like, having male allies and white male allies, like there's, yes, please, like, so many parts of my career have been advanced by the advocacy of white men with more experience than me, that I am just, like, super grateful for, given that things are as they are. We aren't, quite, not quite, it makes it sound like a small thing. Yeah, we're not quite there yet. Like, I think it's
no.
There's such a place for people to have, like, self-awareness and to pull other people up, sort of anyone who's maybe doesn't have the privilege that you have within your context.
Yeah, and I think that like, adding to what Phil said in terms of the responses being amplified in the public environment, at least most open source communities where I showed up, majority of the people are there because they are interested in the same technology, finding solution to the same problem, and we are all trying to work on a shared mission, and that kind of helps with setting it aside your gender, your country of origin, your religion, or any other aspects about you besides the fact that we are again trying to work on something together. And I think that that can probably be something that is feeding into my experience in terms of how it is easier for me to find my voice and communicate in open source communities versus a corporate environment, when a corporate environment is usually about, a bit of a competition between colleagues. We want the same promotion maybe, or, shooting for a similar position, and all the inequities and, salaries and all those kind of things. Like, all that part, you don't really have that in the open source community. And the other thing is, like, being on IRC or any kind of a chat tool or a mailing list, majority of the time people see my nickname or my email address, and they may or may not know what gender I identify with. I remember, what was that, 9 years ago, I showed up at the OpenStack Design Summit because we were trying to push a feature through in one of the networking projects. And I was more of the vocal people within the company. I already built a name in that community overall. So I was doing some of the email communications. And I remember guys, not just white, but guys walking up to me and saying like, "Oh, you're a woman. We thought you're a guy because my first name ends with an O, and I think in one of the languages it means that you're most probably a guy." Just because they see a name that's a foreign name, you don't have a way to guess almost really anything about the other person. So it's kind of hiding in plain sight in a way that you can really just communicate about the topics that you're passionate about. And if people see your passion, your motivation, even if you don't know something, but if you do have the willingness to learn and the willingness to negotiate with people that, yeah, I want to do this, they want to do that. So what's the middle ground? And then we will find it together.